Good afternoon. My name is Corazon Juliano Soliman. People call me Dinky. I'm the Secretary for Social Welfare and Development and also one of the vice chairs of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council of the Philippine government. I have a comment and a question. I cannot agree more with the need for giving information, and that's partly what we have been trying to do. We do have the geohazard maps in the eastern coast, which is the most hit by typhoons, and we have been using different media, but more important, and that's a campaign that we're doing, really making that information available to the communities who are most vulnerable. And I think I just want to share a challenge that in most of these vulnerable communities, we have to move them out. And that's the biggest challenge. Moving them from the areas where, for the last 2 generations, they have been staying in, to areas that are safe. So that's my comment. The second is a question, and it's really to Jay. I think one of the things that I was just reflecting upon when you were talking is, it was also intimated by Margaret, the investments that private sector or business make can cause a disaster. So is there a parameter or is there a criteria that city, for example, is very concerned about this, both in urban and in rural areas? Do you have some kind of criteria, parameter to measure so that the preventive action is truly powerful? Because if the investment can catalyze a disaster is prevented, then it's your $1 to $7, I think, even greater. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. One more, maybe. Yes, please.
Thank you. Bernie Ripoll. I'm Parliamentary Secretary, the Treasurer in Australia. Australia's got some experience, like lots of parts of Asia, with natural disasters, particularly more recently with floods, but also with devastating fires. A couple of just some comments, just to give you some idea of the experience we've had, but which is that certainly coordination between all levels of government, local government level, City Hall has been mentioned, between state, regional governments and the Commonwealth. And certainly a lot of work was done to prepare our communities for natural disasters, particularly floods, which you can do a bit more preparation for from time to time. But one of the things that really struck out in my region that was flooded last year was the duplication of services provided between community, church, local groups, many people wanting to do good things, but lots and lots of duplication and people not being properly coordinated in their efforts and their desire or will to help. So we found a lot of problems in trying to coordinate that. Very difficult area because obviously genuine people wanting to do genuine good, but sometimes, well certainly for us, the problem became of too many volunteers and not enough work or coordinated work. So just as a thought and perhaps a response. Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you very much. Australian experience. We have one more contribution. Madam, please.
I'm also Corazon, but from the private sector of the Philippines, Corazon Claudia, Earth Institute Asia. I think one problem that we have is that we put the cart before the horse. We do management measures without first assessing what the condition is. For example, in earthquake, preparing for earthquake, we do earthquake drills, which is a risk management measure, even before we assess whether the building that we are in is safe enough, or there is something that can blow up under, or whether the building code is still operational. What is the experience in other countries in terms of focusing efforts on the assessment part? we are trying to do something here that is Google-based so that a community can have all the data that they have been producing all these years. And you see, what's happening is that they produce a lot of information when they do their risk management plan. They call it in different ways. And then after that, they put this somewhere in a locked cabinet that only the LGU officials, for example, know about. And then the data become stale, and they do not even use this in actual preparedness work. So what's happening in other parts of the world in terms of improving the risk assessment process?
Good, thank you very much. With these three contributions, I think we may be ready for a second round with the panel here. And I will also invite the panelists, if you want to pick up on what your co-panelists have already commented on. A few things that you already highlighted from the first round. One was Australia, you talked about coordination in a federal state. I'd invite the panelists to comment on this because it's really critical. It's critical for resource base, for financing, for how policy is created, and how do local governments in today's world contribute to national policy making? Where is their seat at the table? You can say it's different in every country. But in many countries, the seat at the table is not very clear. It's the same with communities in a way. We will often get the question from communities, how do we impact national policy making? Where is our knowledge coming into the picture? So I think that's one important issue. The issue of coordination has already been raised, and I'm sure that both from Jay, the private sector, you observed it as a challenge in the public sector, but I'm sure it's a challenge in the private sector as well. For sure, I can promise you it's a challenge in international institutions. Financing and policy, the quality of the volume and the question of scale has come up. Does scale matter? Are there certain things that become more important just because of the scale? Let me just give you an idea about what I think at least three of us have commented on. What you don't measure doesn't count really. When it comes to counting the losses of disasters, for as much as we talk about it, very few governments today systematically count the losses of disasters. From local level upwards, this is the biggest, let's say, black hole for us to be able to talk about scale of losses to development investments. So to all these figures that we have mentioned today, I would advise you to add at least another 50%, and you may start reaching a realistic figure. Not enough. 100, double it. So you see, there are among you people who know a lot about this. If we say, you know, how many kilometers of rural road gets destroyed? How many small bridges? How many school buildings? How many clinics? And they don't really show up, certainly not in global statistics, but very rarely even in national statistics because the system isn't there. Governments count unemployment, count income on many other things and losses in healthcare, for example. But this thing doesn't yet feature. And we are puzzled why, since we know that the losses are significant. So the financing, and then the public-private partnership, as we call it. It's not only after, it's also before, and I would like to take us a step
Excuse me.
further. The partnership has to be there all the time. I would be interested to hear you talking about how to develop a new type of dialogue between the public and the private, one that isn't sort of a gift to be given in distressed times, but one sharing of some huge challenges and see how these can be resolved. I know they are good examples of this, so let's see. So with that, and the issue of how did you convince the Japanese public to agree to a tax increase?
Yes. When I first proposed a new tax for reconstruction, the media attacked me, concentrated attack to me. The no more tax.
Yeah.
But after discussing what is necessary for victimized area, how can we support them and move uphill is inevitable in order not to repeat the tsunami disaster this time. The 20,000 sacrifice this time. Considering the hugeness of this tsunami, the earthquake, it's not a big number because our education soft was good. In that area, they all knew there will be another tsunami. So the education was done at the elementary school, middle school, and high school. And the students were told, you should not care other person. You, in person, escape uphill. Higher to pace. So the deaths among the children and the school boys, except for Oka Elementary School. That school was considered safe area, and teachers gathering students. But the tsunami came. It's an unprecedented huge tsunami. So they are killed. That's tragic. But except for that, all boys and girls ran away. So education was very important. But the problem is the local government, mayor, and official are also killed. This time, the boys, girls escaped, but person who are in charge of taking care of the resident stayed in the dangerous building, and some firemen went to the seashore to stop, to close the door of the river, and they are all killed. So it's a sad story. The person who want to take care of others are killed by tsunami. In the process of reconstruction, the Japanese people come to understand the new tax is inevitable because we have 200% GDP national debt. That's bigger than Greek. And as the Japanese people as a whole has this big saving money, so the market is still not attacking Japan country. But if we continue this situation, they are sure in 5-10 years Japan will become Greek situation. So we should avoid that, and we should not send our debt to future generation. That's not morally good. I have children and grandchildren. The number is decreasing. They should pay for us. It's not equal. So the Japanese people come to understand for the reconstruction money, the huge money, the 20 trillion yen, that is $250 billion. I believe that is necessary for the future generation and for the victimized area. And after paying for that reconstruction, my hope, I'm proposing that for the future pre-disaster construction, for instance, city of Kochi will be attacked by next big tsunami from southwest Japan. The Pacific Ocean is very active and going down to the Japanese island, and there will occur. And at that time, city of Kochi, which is some 400,000 citizens will be under the water. So to stop that, we need a seawall in the entrance of Urado Bay, and another the gate just before Kochi City. If we construct two gate, then the people will be safe. But to construct that, it needs much money. But fortunately, the government passed new law for reducing tsunami disaster and making safer community for the future. That is very good, but that was not accompanied by the budget. So for budget, they should to somehow gather money. Government is now legitimizing and encouraging to prevent future disaster, to reduce future disaster. But for money, I think after the paying for this Tohoku disaster, we should continue for future disaster constructions. That is very important.
So maybe I think Secretary has asked, it's so difficult to convince people to move from where they have always been, or where we have always been, I should say.
Donation is okay.
And I know...
Donation is okay, but when it comes to tax, imposed tax, then people become very unhappy and sometimes make riot. So it's
not in Japan. In the beginning, you mentioned that people have agreed to move up hills, some of the towns, the coastal towns. And I remember when I visited Tohoku last July, the mayor in one of the cities said he did the survey and 70% agreed to move up hills.
Yeah.
But he also said, I'm sure when we start to move, they will not want to move anymore.
Yes, that's the most
so how to tackle that?
Now choke. The government prepared money and scheme, but it's now ball is on the local government. Yes. Local government should try to persuade the people, the community, to reach consensus. If they can reach consensus, money will be used. But otherwise, they can't do anything. But as I said, the leader of local government itself are victimized, and the business become bigger and bigger to support people, residents. But to think about how to make new town is a very sophisticated job. And the local government not always have sufficient the personnel and specialists. So the support from this specialized knowledge and is very important from within Japan and all over the world. It's the critical point.
Okay. Good. It's a well-known problem, but not necessarily one that has local solutions, need for expertise, help, motivation, and support by central governments, I think, and not only central governments, maybe also other experts. Mr. Kodera, will you give you a chance to comment on what you've heard, reply to some of the questions, but also maybe take us deeper into the aspects of international cooperation. What can multilateral cooperation do to move the issues?
Okay. John mentioned about the need to learn each other, particularly the multilateral development bank's experience and the bilaterals, and try to identify the best practice. And yeah, we are looking for it. And first, I would urge the people here to look at the Margaretas Institution, UN, the ISDR's the report. They have a very good the good practice and the lesson learned handbook. And you have to go to the website, the wonderful story on the Bangladesh. They have standardized the risk assessment, and also the World Bank, the local government support program is well highlighted. But probably the challenge is institutionalize these the risk prevention mechanism in the developing countries, particularly in the low-income countries. First, you have to identify sort of the national champion of the institutions. And the government have to recognize what's feasible or not. And also, the communication is very important, but you have to talk in a simple term, at the same time, not to make people feel powerless in front of the overwhelming challenges. So you need to come up with the kind of low-tech the construction material, construction method with affordable cost, and we did it in Sumatra, Indonesia after the 2009 earthquake, and the construction code has been revised, but according to the very easy to employ technology. So the school and the other key official building have been rebuilt according to that low-tech standard, but it's doable. Also, once again, education is important, but standardized rapid assessment of the possible losses, we haven't have an answer yet. So this is learning by doing process, and how we should do it cheaper and faster. Still challenges there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And can I just come back to you on the whole issue of development investments generating risk in themselves? This was in fact a private, no, I think also Secretary raised the issue for the private sector, but of course we also know that development investment in themselves can generate new risks. So any experiences on how that can be anticipated by looking at, you know, the criteria for the investment and how to integrate it best in the overall risk environment?
Once again, this is a very good question and difficult to answer. I mentioned about the new paradigm and adding new spin of the adaptation to the climate changes and disaster prevention. But even within JICA, infrastructure people doesn't talk to the environment people, and disaster prevention department doesn't talk to infrastructure people. So the mainstreaming these two new spins, it's easy to say, and big institution like World Bank, ADB, and us, we know that. But walking the talk, that's very difficult. And the leadership of each institution at the managerial level really had to be always try to be very specific. Are you guys talking to each other? Don't stuck in the silo. And but you know, doing this, we are learning, and every year we are improving and try to find the new best practices. And so I think track is moving in the right direction. But how fast? Challenge is still there. But it only comes with the interaction with our clients. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Jay, there are some specific questions that in fact relate also to my question. I promised I would come back to you. But let me be also maybe very precise. After the now very well documented impact on the global supply chain from the Thai floods, and the impact also on the world from Japan. Do you think there is a conversation going among business and enterprises that this will change any way they think about their investments, that they look at rewarding countries that are obviously better at looking at their resilience issue, particularly large urban areas like Manila, Bangkok. And I think Professor has mentioned some Japanese cities very concretely and said Tokyo is next, Osaka. You've been very precise. Does it have any impact?
Okay, lots of questions. Let me take them in pieces, Margarita. First, there hasn't been enough thinking in the private sector on impact assessment and thought processes around, do I invest based on natural disaster criteria? Think about this. Think of it this way. Everyone in this room, if I say green policy investments, green environmentally sound best practices for anything green, everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? And we would all assess, I would certainly, that best practice for corporates around the world, if they're going to make an investment now, there is a net assessment done on appropriateness in the green world. Well, we need similar thought that is yet insufficient around resilience investment policy, what I call at least resilient investment policies. So that same approach, think green now in the natural disaster space, which is before I invest in a city, before I invest in a country as a corporate, I would like you, Mr. Government Official, to talk to me about your policies, how you will respond, how you are prepared. If I, as a bank, am going to look at investing in an infrastructure project, I would like to understand and assess the land management policies. If I'm an IFI, if I'm a policy bank, I would like to look at the documentation and have some type of policy conditionality, as Vinod suggested, in the resilience dimension to that. So I think we're fundamentally lacking in coming together around what the private sector can do proactively to influence, as you put it, Margarita, the policy world here. And that's a shame because we can do more. The private sector, two issues where I think the private sector has done well. One is COB, right? So an internal focus on your contingency planning on how you're going to manage your business in the event of a crisis. So that needs to go one step further from an internal dialogue about how that will work and the mechanics of that to the policy dialogue of I invest incremental new dollars in you when we're sure together that we're prepared for that and that we're investing in prevention. In terms of another area that you pointed to on, say, Thailand, Japan, there is absolutely tremendous dialogue and focus that has shaken the supply chain, global supply chain world as a result of those crises. So there you've had both plan B of, okay, what happens to my supply chain if I lose my operational capability for, if I'm an auto part manufacturer and I supply a Toyota or a General Motors, what happens? That thinking now has absolutely gone on. Fundamentally, we at Citi have seen a number of things. One is plan B often becomes plan A when you move out. Actually, you may not come back. That ends up being the reality of how supply chains move. And the macro themes around what's happening in urbanization and coastal city vulnerabilities is influencing that plan B and the thought process around my supply chain and where is it protected and how can it be managed. So I would absolutely use the automobile sector as a sector where throughout the chain very deep dive thinking has gone on in that space. Let me just take two other questions and address them quickly. One from our Australian colleague about the private sector partnerships and the dialogue, and I would just point to one example, and there are many, many, but Craig Fugate, the head of FEMA in the United States, has developed a program of secondees of the private sector to FEMA to actually sit in with FEMA and be the private sector liaison to the private sector during a natural disaster. Citibank, for example, is the private sector secondee currently to FEMA. And the thought process around this is actually extraordinary. It's that if you're actually sitting in the emergency disaster response unit of your central government as the private sector liaison, and you're able to communicate with the private sector in a way that the private sector knows how, that the speed and agility to do that is tremendous. And we at Citi think that that's a very powerful concept. Target and others have actually done that before us, but to rotate those secondees by sector seems to be something that I definitely think that that Administrator Fugate and FEMA have taught us how to cooperate better. And then finally, in terms of the Secretary and others raised the issue of information and getting information to those affected by natural disasters and communicating with them. We think that the mobile phone is revolutionizing the approach to not only financial inclusion and how payments can be made, but identity and information and payments are converging. And let me just explain that. So if the unbanked are vulnerable to natural disasters and they're largely unidentified, they have a mobile phone, and I want to get payments to them, and I can do that through a mobile phone, I can also target them and communicate with them both ways. Okay, it's revolutionary. It will absolutely change how NGOs and ODA is delivered on a direct impact basis. When I get to the point, take the Philippines, where not only can I target benefit payments to farmers in rural areas with mobile payments, but I can actually communicate with them, for example, with texts, SMS, USSD technology, low-end technology, and I can warn them of a natural disaster coming. I can target them based on where they are with their mobile phone. So there's a location-based component to information management. I can identify who they are as I begin to interface with them as a beneficiary of a government benefit payment, but now I start to associate information flow on what they need to have from me and what I need from them in terms of information. And if this world is applied to CCTs, to conditional cash transfers, the potential thinking of how we can impact the poor in a natural disaster will really change policy going forward.
Thank you. So thank you for particularly your thoughts about private sector role in tackling some of these things. Thanks for that. We are reaching very quickly the end of this session. Before I will ask Vinod actually to try to, in order not to lose sight of the urban areas, they have some, because we've had some difficulties in focusing on those, probably because there wasn't the mayor here forcing the focus. All of these things that we've talked about are actually happening in much larger scale in urban areas. And the way we tackle, be it emergency response, policy planning, ability to retrofit cities, quite frankly. Some of them are such overwhelming challenges with annual flooding, difficulties to keep up with the infrastructural quality. So we may ask ourselves, can we actually deal with the risks in urban areas? Is it a realistic proposition? And I'd like to say yes immediately, because there is enough practice and it's really good. But it's also recognition that urban people are different from the traditional development approach we've all been used to in rural areas. Urban communities are different. They change when they move from rural to urban areas. They communicate differently, they have different networks, they have a different view on authority, be it of the local government or central government. So it's a new environment where, except for the local governments themselves, I'm not so sure that there is enough expertise yet on really how to tackle many of the opportunities, I would say. I just mentioned a few things that have come up here that are, of course, relevant also for rural areas, but maybe particularly challenging for urban one. One is the constant wonder about building codes. Literally every country in the world today has got a building code. It's not the absence of a building code, it's the relevance of the code, is who is enforcing it and what are the incentives. It's really the applicability of the code that incentivizes me to choose a safe apartment from a less safe one. I think it's also the issue that the secretary raised about how to incentivize people to move from not so safe to safer areas. The public and private space in urban areas is maybe the biggest opportunity. In fact, if you've listened to the new head of UN Habitat, who is a former mayor of one of the successful retrofitted cities in the world, Barcelona, he says this is the most critical issue for the future, how to segregate in clear policy terms public and private space in urban areas and improve the public space, widen it, create more space for the public. But how do you do that in an already overcrowded city? And the good thing with him is that he will have very concrete ideas on how to do that, how to make cities livable. So the zoning of cities, several of you have mentioned land use planning and zoning. And that is one of the greatest risk areas that, and many cities, they know very well the risks because the risk assessments have been done, the knowledge exists, and yet it's so difficult to get a policy shift. And I think some of the answers is in the better public-private space segregation. And then, since we've talked a lot about the enormous growth of cities, it is important to look at cities also for emergency response. So a lot of the things that have to be done, some of you have talked about drill and management of an immediate crisis. Making cities accessible for emergency response is already that a very critical priority. Making sure you have spaces for evacuation and access of emergency intervention. So these are some of the things that have come up. But Vinod, what we really would like to get is into the development planning and government's fiscal thinking. What do you think we can draw as a conclusion of the things that have come up in this session as a way forward? Is there any positive things? We have to have a good conclusion here that will motivate all of us to go back to our offices now and do something.
I'll give it a try, building on what I've already heard. Also, the time is limited. I look at the body language of people. I think wish we had more time to hear from everyone. But reflecting on what has been said, I thought from that point of view of the chair, the governance and the coordination and getting the act together is a big deal, right? And we didn't have time, but just from the examples of where this has worked a little bit better, is Dagupan City's experience a good one? I mean, Promise and how it became part of the community's effort. Or Gujarat earthquake, it had 19 organizations, ministerial organizations, getting their act together in that case. On the other hand, many examples of where different kinds of coordination, either connecting the dots or just donors really working all in different directions, working in silos and so on, was a real big problem, whether it is Honduras, Rio, that was a very striking case, and so on. So from this, the spotlight on good governance associated with this and getting coordination going could have big payoffs. The second thing, I think sort of connecting with what Jay said and the chair's final question, the big picture, how to get the country's national development effort more aligned to the reality of natural disasters, in my view, augmented heavily by the reality of climate change. We did a careful work on the Philippines and found that you can't prove that the number of cyclones have increased on average, but there is very striking evidence that the extremes have, and that even an average cyclone destroys more, and there are many factors behind that. In that setting, this focus here at the ADB annual meetings rightly is on economic growth in one way or the other, but inclusive growth. It is also sustainable growth. So that, having shown, is a good way to reduce poverty by the fastest and the largest amount in Asia compared to any other region, puts the focus on growth rightly. But the question is it simply that let's grow but deal with this also, or is it that you cannot grow at 6% per capita anymore unless natural disasters and its links to climate are addressed? I'm coming from that view based on the evidence I have seen. So the discussion has to change. The assumption, the economists are equally to blame in this as anyone else in making projections devoid of the reality of the natural disaster story. And then that then translates, in my view, to what each of us does. And since I'm from the ADB right now, let me just mention, multilateral organizations in their planning, how much effort really needs to go into this, both in terms of financing, leveraged and used better, not just putting money, but in terms of staff and knowledge and skills. Have those knowledge and skills depleted or gone up in the wake of a rising need that there is? And with that, the good assessment, sometimes it's overdone, sometimes it's underdone. That's critical. And emergency and reactive measures, which always will be there, they need to build in the proactive things as well. Even in an emergency room, you've got to follow protocols, because you might make things worse by doing things in a hurry that are not thought through. So making this part of our agenda in a more systematic way is a task for developing multilateral development organization as much as anyone else. Australia is an interesting case in that it may have one of the highest emissions per capita, but it also has in place a carbon pricing measure and a number of things, and a commitment to put in a lot of 10 billion into low carbon economy. So at a high level of macro policy, things need to change, coupled with the micro things, many of which we discussed today. Thank you.
So with that, I thank you for summarizing. That was, I think, an excellent summary. I'd like to thank all the panelists. I'm sure, like the rest of us, we would like to continue discussion, but please do continue to discuss with us. I think we have a new partnership here on this panel. And there is, for those of you who say, where is the data? Where is the evidence for what they are saying? There is a good literature now that is looking at public and private investment. and the literature is growing by the day. There is a report coming out, a joint effort between UN ESCAP, ourselves, and the UN system, looking at precisely the link between Asia-specific development indicators and disaster losses. It will be available in October this year. So that will help you with very precise data from this region, but you will also find it in other regions. So thank you very much for staying with us this afternoon, and we look forward to continue the conversation. And thank you very much, both of our panelists from Japan, Jay and Vinod. Thank you.